Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today in the 33rd edition of our CVC Insider Series. My name is Alba, part of 500 Global, one of the world's most active seed stage investment firms, having backed over 2,500 exceptional startups in 75 countries. And within 500, I work closely with our corporate investors and innovators. And about a year and a half ago, we launched the CVC Insider Series to continue raising the bar of the corporate venturing community. Every 2 weeks, we host this roundtable featuring some of the world's top corporate venturing practitioners and sharing their unique journey into the industry, best practices they've developed throughout their careers. And this week, we have the utmost pleasure to feature Quinn Li, Senior Vice President and Global Head of Qualcomm Ventures. Quinn has spent the last 16 years at Qualcomm Ventures and oversees today Qualcomm's billion-dollar venture portfolio and 150 companies across 7 global regions. Our wonderful host, Nicolas Sauvage, will be moderating today's discussion, but there is also a Q&A function. So feel free to ask any questions along the way, and we'll do our best to cover. We hope you enjoyed today's session and come back to the next edition. Nicolas, off to you.
Thank you, Alba, and thank you, 500 Global. I think exactly like you said, it's going to be an utmost pleasure to hear and learn from Quinn. I met Quinn in my very first GCV Monterey event, which was in 2019, January. And he's one of these person that's really kind and shares a lot. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you, Quinn. So if you don't mind, maybe 5-10 minutes sharing about your journey into corporate venturing and your time in Qualcomm Ventures.
Yeah, thank you, Nicolas, and thank you, 500 Startups, for hosting the event. Pleasure to be here. Long story how I got into the venture business. I studied engineering undergraduate, and I went on to graduate school, studied communication system design, so information theory specific. Read a lot of books by Qualcomm's co-founders. I really got interested in engineering, and then after graduate school, I went on to work for Bell Labs and worked on 3G, wireless system design and standards. So now it's 5G, back then it was 3G. And beyond the technical work I was working on in 3G technology development, I also had the opportunity to participate in standards bodies. So we were making proposals to the standards organization and working with other companies, the ecosystem, as well as customers to define what the 3G wireless standard is going to be. So through that experience, I learned that in addition to the technical work, which I enjoyed to do, also the interaction with the other parties in the ecosystem, customers, other industry players, that part of it was very rewarding. And because in the standardization process, you have to make proposals, you have to negotiate with other companies. So that elements of the work was very, very intriguing. And I thought longer term, I think I want to do a much bigger role than just doing engineering work. So I decided to go back to business school to get an MBA. And that's when I got a taste of venture capital. So during the MBA program, there was, I went to Cornell, there was a student-run venture fund, and was more used as a learning vehicle for students to learn how to invest in venture-backed startups. So we have a team of, I think it was 10 people or so, that was acting as investment professionals. I was looking at pretty early stage opportunities that's funded by Cornell alums or even current students, that we were actually evaluating live investment opportunity and making smaller investment in these early stage companies. So that's our first experience with venture capital. And then post business school, I went on to work for IBM, took a job in product management. I thought I should get some basic business skills. And then Qualcomm is a company that I always wanted to work for. Because based on my graduate work, all of my field of study was all related to the CDMA technology, a lot of the pioneer work that Qualcomm did. And then I found out they had also this venture group. So I got to know the head of the venture group back then, was in my current role today. And I got to know him and ask if there was an opportunity to work for the team. And then there was an opportunity came up when I was at IBM, and I applied for the role and joined in, back then in 2005. And then I started off as an individual contributor with a team. So I was looking at investment opportunities. In fact, the first investment I made was InventSense.
Yes,
Which was bought by TDK later on. So that was a very exciting investment that I made. It wasn't an easy one to make back then, but no, it turned out very well. And then from there, my career sort of progressed, and then I started to run the U.S. team for a period of time, and then I took over as head of the group in beginning of 2016.
Very nice. So InventSense is interesting because indeed it was successful. It was not easy. It went to an IPO. That's how we actually knew each other, from the connection with Behrooz, who was CEO of InventSense.
That's right.
And that was your first investment. So that I did not know.
Yeah, that
so
was
walk me through that very first investment. How did you get to decide to invest?
So we actually had a very thesis-driven approach to investing, which we still do today. And we looked at a lot of technologies that we think are going to make their way into the smartphone ecosystem. So we looked at motion sensors, for example, fingerprint sensors. And in the motion sensor category, we looked at various companies, and then found InventSense really had good technology in terms of the initial product, as you know, was a gyroscope, and was making its way into cameras and personal navigation devices. Our view of the world back then was, as these devices all converge, a lot of the functionalities from the digital still cameras, as well as navigation devices, all will be integrated into the smartphone at some point. So that was the vision.
Yep.
So because these gyros or motion sensors was integrated into these devices, our prediction of the future was, at some point, smartphones will adopt these devices as well. And then I met the founder, Steve Nasseri, back then. He was very, experienced entrepreneur, had a couple of startups prior, and was able to basically on Series A, was able to get to a product, was shipping a product, which is very impressive for a company that's making a hardware product. So I was very impressed by the CEO, and we had a good understanding of the market landscape, and found that InventSense had really good technology and had good customer traction. So that's why I decided we invest in InventSense.
Very nice. I mean, this was your first investment, and it went IPO. So I think you put all of us to shame, I think.
There's some obviously, there's good timing. I would say good timing.
No, very nice. So one thing I did not know from your background was that you worked in standards. So actually, I also worked in standards in ITU and CEPT and HC. So how much of this standards building, which requires an ecosystem mindset, working with different partners on really deep technology depths, how much of that is shaping you as an investor?
I would say a lot of the work in standards, which is, there's a technology element of proposals being done, and then there's also the business aspects of shaping standards body, right? There's a lot of competing interests from a variety of players in the industry wants to put their technology or proposal in the standards body. So that's what I learned, that the sort of the negotiation with other players in the ecosystem, trying to drive to consensus on what is the right thing to go into standards. So that's when I got taste of the business world in combination with technology. And I would say some of the skill set I learned from attending standards meeting, present the proposals, be able to negotiate with other players, I think is still relevant in my world today. We work with entrepreneurs. We're trying to form syndicate of other investors, trying to negotiate with the entrepreneurs, in terms of finding the right deal to pursue and so forth. I think many of these skill sets are still relevant in my job today.
Yeah, I agree. I like to think about negotiations as either long-term or short-term negotiation. Long-term is where you need to build reputation. You're going to negotiate with the same actors again and again. And I think standards is really a good way to learn to negotiate well with a long-term view of win-wins.
That's correct. Absolutely.
So tell me more about this angel investment experience you had, because this is your first glimpse into deciding very early stage companies whether you invest your own money, not someone else's money, but your own money. So how much of that shaped you?
So I would say that the student-run venture fund is actually part of the Cornell endowment. So it's not personal money, my personal money, but it's money that folks donated to the school. And the purpose was to allow the student to learn about venture investment, right? So we're deploying small amount of capitals. I think back then, I think was maybe $10,000, $20,000 kind of investment sizes we were making. But it's real investment. It's really a learning vehicle for the student to learn how to evaluate an investment opportunity and to make investment, and hopefully, the investment will grow over time and generate a return on investment. But it's really a learning vehicle for the student to experience real, like a through live experience about venture investing.
So what is one of the number one learning you have from that time that you still apply today?
Number one learning at the time, back then, I think was the framework around how we look at an investment opportunity. That's the first time I got a taste of, there's a lot of aspect to an investment opportunity. There's the team aspect, there's the product aspect, there's the market aspect, there's the competitive landscape aspect. So we were able to put a framework together and evaluate the different aspects of the investment opportunity. And some of these elements, I think I still remember today and still use in our world today.
I have a feeling this video is going to be used by Cornell as well as a promotion to the program. That's really, really interesting. So let's talk about Qualcomm. So clearly you knew about Qualcomm from your CDMA studies, you knew about the company, then you joined Qualcomm in the Qualcomm Ventures group right away, or Qualcomm Corporation first?
I joined straight into the Qualcomm Ventures group. Back then, we were relatively small. We had, I think, 3 investment professionals at that time, over the years, we grew the team both from an international presence perspective as well as the area we invest have expanded over time as well. So today, we're managing a global portfolio of about 150 active companies. It's got 1.5 billion asset that we're managing, and we invest in a broad areas of 5G, automotive, IoT, and AI technologies, in areas that we hope that we invest in companies that could potentially leveraging the technology that Qualcomm is developing, and help trying to create win-win situations for both the startup as well as Qualcomm.
Very nice. And that leads to a question about sponsorship with Qualcomm business units. It feels like your investments don't necessarily need a direct link to the business group, but more to the strategy, the vision of the future. Do you need sponsorships from the business groups? Do you work with them closely? How does it work?
Yeah, so we work with the BUs very, very closely. So I would say to a large extent, if there's an investment opportunity that's relevant for a business group, let's say an opportunity that's relevant for the 5G business group, then we would typically run that investment opportunity with the business group, get their opinion on it, get their feedback, and sometimes they will even help us to do some due diligence on the investment opportunity. And then we get their sort of buy-in in terms of the investment. Now, there are opportunities where it may not fit in the business group in the near term, because our job is to look further ahead, maybe 3-5 years ahead on where the technology is going. And in these type of opportunity, if it's not a direct fit with a business group, we can make decisions on our own, as long as in the general areas that we're interested in investing, in the broader areas where we see technologies going, where we see potential intersections with Qualcomm down the road, we can make those investments as well.
Very nice, which is really about the strategic fit. So maybe you can walk us through one of your amazing success, which is Zoom. Zoom is not an obvious fit to any business unit, but at the same time, it's about mobile technology. So can you walk us through the investment thesis and also how you decided to invest?
Yeah, Zoom was an interesting one. So when we looked at the Zoom back then, obviously there was a lot of other companies with video conferencing solutions already in the marketplace. What we liked about Zoom was it was a platform that's designed, it's very, very easy to use, right? And it's also when they designed it in the beginning was meant to be cross-platform, meaning it's not PC centric. It's meant to be work across mobile devices, laptops, tablets, as well as desktop PCs, right? It's really meant to be a cross-platform device. So one of the things I think got interested for us on Zoom was, one is it's a great use case of a lot of wireless data, right? You consume a huge amount of data across, whether it's the enterprise network or through the cellular network. It's just a lot of consumption of wireless data. And the other aspect I think we found that was interesting was we could potentially, work with them, help them to optimize the experience running on the devices that are powered by our processor, right? There are certain optimizations we could work with Zoom on to help optimize the end-to-end experience. So you're correct. It was not necessarily a perfect fit with a particular business unit, but it's in the broad scheme of video communication is going to be important. We see getting people connected, and evident by the pandemic, Zoom become a household name. And also, we met a entrepreneur was one of the best, greatest entrepreneurs we ever met, Eric. And he was just so passionate about making, he had experience in WebEx, worked there for 15 plus years. He just wanted to make a better video communication product, a product that's so easy to use, that works across platforms, that the user experience is just awesome. So we were very impressed by Eric and the vision he has, and then decided to invest in the company.
I remember you invited me to the Qualcomm Ventures event in San Diego, and Eric joined by Zoom. And what I remember is he really cares about the happiness of the users.
That's right.
So you talked about how much Qualcomm could help Zoom. How much Zoom helped Qualcomm?
Good question. I would say some of these things, kind of the strategic benefits or the fit really happens like sort of over time, right? So I think in the beginning we were trying to help work together to optimize the experience on, let's say, mobile devices. But if you look at today, we're working actually with Zoom on, Zoom is being deployed in conference rooms with dedicated, sort of TVs and projectors and so forth. And many of these projector devices actually have our chips embedded in it, right? So we're trying to work with Zoom on how to optimize that experience in the conference room setting. So there's intersections sort of in the beginning, and then also over the course of time, there's new collaboration opportunity that came along the way as well. So we're still collaborating with Zoom today, and their presence, their scale, I think is helping us to, further advance our business in these areas as well.
Very nice. I mean, there's no doubt that given Zoom's success, Qualcomm would be partnering with Zoom at some point. But you investing early means that you had a chance to create intimacy with the entrepreneur, with the CEO, his team. How much of that do you think is helping Qualcomm to have early access to the startups even before they become an obvious success?
Yeah, a lot of time is, I believe it's our job or our team's job to identify these early companies, to see where I think the Qualcomm views this as sort of boots on the ground, that's eyes, ears on the ground, seeing what's happening in the marketplace, what something might come 3-5 years down the road. And it's our job to bring some of these technologies, innovative technologies, or even business models, those learnings back to the corporation, identify some of these key trends, key opportunities to make some of these earlier bets. And then along the way, trying to bridge the linkage between the startups and Qualcomm. And sometimes work out, not always work out. Sometimes happens, takes some time for the connection to work out. But I think over time, I think we've seen various these connections that happen over time. And as long as you can find companies that will be successful over time, usually there are some connections we can make over a period of time.
Very nice. And can you remind us which stage you invested in Zoom?
We invested in Zoom in Series A.
Series A. Very nice. Very nice. Do you tend to invest in Series A or seed or B? Do you have like a stage preference?
We don't have a stage preference, so we invest across the board. So when I started at Qualcomm Ventures, we probably focused on the mid-stage companies, like InventSense was Series B. And then at one point, we also moved a little bit earlier in Series A as well. And we also had made some seed investment along the way. But today, I would say we're stage agnostic. We'd deploy anywhere between, so it's $2 million to $10 million. That's our initial investment check. We were right. But the key is for us is really about finding the right companies to invest in, and then trying to bridge the connection between Qualcomm over time. I think that's the key.
Yeah. So how much of the strategic value do you bring to the startup? And then we will talk about the startup bringing back to the mothership. But how much of the value do you package and you can replicate across your many portfolio companies?
Yeah, I would say the value we provide to the startup probably varies, depends on where the company is in their development and also what sorts of help they need, right? So I think a lot of times the company looked at as we're a technology enabler. We provide technologies to a variety of industries. And a lot of times in technology selections, let's say companies like, what's a good example? Like Xiaomi, for example, right? They're obviously a leader in the smartphone business. And we were able to work with them very early on in terms of as a new customer in the smartphone ecosystem. Obviously, back then they were very small, but we were able to identify them as a emerging customer, if you will, and work with them very closely to jointly develop product. And then over time, they obviously had huge success. And then that's a situation where it was a very good investment on one hand, and on the other hand, it was also become a very, very good customer of Qualcomm. So it's kind of a win-win situation in that scenario in both. So I would say it's the technology insight that we can provide to some of these startups, the connections we can make with the products groups that we have. Sometimes it's hard for startups to navigate Qualcomm also, so we can help make that connection. And then sometimes if a startup's looking for customers in our ecosystem, for example, if they wanted to talk to a mobile operator, for example, we certainly work a lot with the mobile operator as well. So if they're looking for a connection to our ecosystem of partners and customers, we can certainly facilitate those kind of introductions.
Very nice. You mentioned Xiaomi, and that was a really good investment. Lei Jun is an exceptional entrepreneur and very strong promoter of Qualcomm. Every time they present a new product, they show Qualcomm the chipset, what they can do with it. So that's a beautiful partnership. How much of that partnership do you think is because you invested early in them versus Qualcomm having the right product for them?
I think it's both. I mean, I think investment, I have to, you can look at investment in two different lenses, right? One is we made an equity investment, but at the same time, we also devoted a lot of engineering resources, investment in terms of joint sort of product development, right? So that's an investment that we also have made, or both companies made, I would say, to trying to find the right product. And obviously, Lei Jun, as you said, is also an entrepreneur, and he had a great vision for the company, and then they executed super well, right? And they become a huge player in our ecosystem. So I think that was a scenario where I think both companies found a match that we wanted to work together. So we invested, both on the equity side as well as engineering side as well to help them develop the product.
Very nice. It's a success story. There is no doubt about it. So let's talk about Qualcomm Ventures for a little bit. So when you joined in 2005, it was a much smaller team. Today, I looked at LinkedIn and it says 206 people work there, which I don't think is all full-time Qualcomm Ventures, but they refer to themselves. How big has the team grown, and what is really the big change from 2005 to today in terms of capacity to help the entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I would say the team have grown to, we don't have 206 people. The global team currently is about 30 people. out of which I think we have close to either 19 or 20 investment professionals.
Okay.
I would say the expansion was both in terms of international expansion. So in the beginning, when I joined, we were investing in the US and then started to invest in China back then. Over time, we added different geographical locations like Israel, Europe, India, Latin America, as well as Korea. So we expanded sort of our footprints internationally in markets that's both important from Qualcomm from a business perspective, as well as there's a robust venture ecosystem, right? And then the other aspect I think has to do with just areas where we invest in. Way back in 2005, the smartphone wasn't even there yet, right? It was feature phones.
Yeah.
So over a course of time, obviously, we had the wireless data. And then a smartphone came about. And if you look at our business today, we're really trying to take the technology we developed for the smartphone ecosystem, expand into other areas like automotive, like IoT. So that has expanded our investment landscape as well. So today we invest outside of smartphones in automotive, in IoT, in various verticals, as well as in different use cases of AI technologies. So autonomous cars is a huge use case of AI technology. Robotics is another use case of AI technology. So we're touching so many different verticals, I would say, today versus back then.
Very nice. And you talked about geo expansion. Do you have any learnings, either from mistakes or from doing the right thing in terms of doing it well? Because it's not just about recruiting one person locally and hope it goes well. So do you have any tips for the audience about how to do geo expansion well?
Yeah, I think you should look at two aspects, right? One is it geo important from you from a overall business perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is the local sort of venture startup ecosystem, right? Does it have enough entrepreneurs? Does it have a robust ecosystem? And then I think it's important to have the right person. Probably the first hire is probably very important.
Yep.
Because that person has to be able to operate fairly independently. You either have to send somebody from the US to that international location, or hire somebody who is senior enough at the local level who understands the ecosystem, the major players, and have that person sort of be the initial first hire. And then from there, if he or she wants to add additional member, you can. So that first hire, I think, is very important. Because if you don't find the right person, then things may not go as well as if you can find the right person with the right background, the right fit with the rest of the team. I think that's how you should think about it.
It's even more true because it's a small team to start with.
That's right.
So one person could have a disproportionate impact on even the brand you're trying to present.
That's right. That's right.
So if we look at your geographical expansion since 2005, has it been mostly people relocating who were already in the team, or was it mostly new hires locally?
We have done mostly, I would say, hires locally. We've done earlier days, we've done relocating people from the US to the regional offices. But to a large extent, the current team, if you look at the current team, it's all mostly local hires. Yeah, and then some, like in China, for example, it's a person that who's currently running the China office is a person that was part of Qualcomm before joined in the ventures group.
So how do you find someone who was in the corporation, no VC background per se, and how do you help them to become good investors?
Yeah, so I think the venture game is very much of a apprentice type of business, right?
Yep.
So I think requires a lot of coaching, a lot of help from the team. But I think most importantly, I would say we have a set of approach on how we invest, right? So I think it's about the discipline, about the focus. We want to invest in area that we have unfair knowledge. So area we know better than many other investors, for example,
Yep.
right? In areas we're investor generally in the kind of the deep tech area. So there's certain areas I think just because sheer size of a company, the role we play in industry, we should have an unfair knowledge or more knowledge than other folks in that particular area. And if we don't know about it, we should learn about it. So it's about, I think, have a disciplined approach to investing, and then also invest in areas that we know very, very well. So as long as you have that framework, then people join the team, sort of just kind of learn the framework over time. And then there's a lot of coaching and help with other team members who's been with the team longer, and to figure out how to make investment.
I really like what you say. And I like it's nearly like unfair advantage. You know more than anyone else. But also, once you invest, you also have the unfair advantage. You can have your mothership bringing a lot of value to that portfolio company. How do you ensure that you're going to deliver on the value Qualcomm can bring to the portfolio company? Especially, you don't need sponsorship, you just need buy-in maybe. But how do you track the value you bring to the portfolio company? Do you have a team for that? Is it you tracking it?
Yeah, so I think that's one area we're continuously looking for improvements, right? We do have a couple of folks on the team that helps with making the connections with the BUs. And although we don't need like strict sponsorship, but we get the buy-in from BU is also very important, because a lot of times in the beginning, maybe the BU near-term focus is not in this particular area, right? They're just not ready to engage, for example. But at least they're aware, okay, we're making this investment. There could be intersect down the road. And then some time passed, maybe a year passed, and then they said, okay, now is the time to engage. So it happens quite a bit. At the time when we make an investment, maybe there's not a immediate interest to engage, but over time, that interest sort of materializes, and then we see active engagement between companies. So I think we, as a team, we're really trying to do as much as we can to make the connection with the Qualcomm business unit, and then trying to help the companies, whether it's business development efforts or other things, to the extent possible beyond just the capital, right? We really want to, at the end of the day, these companies or this investment we have to grow over time to be very, very successful. And then ideally to also have this connection with Qualcomm as well.
I would nearly argue that the portfolio companies where you didn't have direct engagement with Qualcomm at the beginning, but a few years later, you start to have Qualcomm wanting to engage with your portfolio companies, is telling that you were really good at spotting the mega trend or where Qualcomm should go. I'm sure there's an analogy in the sport where you should go where the bucket goes. I can't remember the term, but
where the puck goes, yeah.
Exactly. That I think is really a good sign when you could show that one of the portfolio company you invested, some of your team in your mothership wants to engage. How do you make
to that point, I think what we're trying to do is, obviously, we look at the market and see where emerging sort of technology come, right? And then the other thing I think is also important, goes to my point about being disciplined. We're trying to identify winners in a particular area. Now, it's not always easy to do, right? But to the extent it's possible, if you can identify the winners early on in this particular market segment, they're going to do both well financially because they're leader in the space, and the chances of them intersecting with Qualcomm at some point increases as well, higher. So I think, understand the space, trying to identify, pick winners early on. That's key.
I can't agree more, and maybe I will share something, which is Xiaomi. I saw them early, and I didn't think they were going to be the winners. So, gosh, I was proven wrong here.
It's not easy. Early days are not easy. It wasn't obvious. Zoom, right? When we invested early, was not an easy decision, I would say. Right? Yeah. Quite a lot.
I think you're making a good point, which is a golden nugget, which is once you pick the winners or the future winners, once they become winners, of course your mothership would want to engage with them because they become obvious partners or customers or go to market or whatever it is that your mothership would want to work with them.
That's right. I think the hard part is to identify them early before they become obvious winners, right? That's the hard part.
And so here I want to touch on one word you said, which I think touch exactly on spotting the winners or identifying which ones could become the winners, which is the word discipline. Can you double click on that word? What does that mean for you and for your team?
I would say discipline just means we have a framework upon which we look at investment opportunity. One is to really understand the sector well. So we do a lot of research in the sector we invest in. We understand the competitive landscape of what are different players out there and trying to identify winners, right? We don't get it right every time, but I think if you understand the space well, you tend to have a higher probability to find the winners. So that's one. And then the other part of being disciplined is we do want to make sure that we invest in companies that got good investors, got good management team, that's got a highly differentiated product, right? Because over time, it's the team behind the business that makes the business work ultimately, right? So it's very important we work with really great founding teams. We have good investors around the table to support the company, because that's just going to increase their probability of success.
Yeah.
So just the approach being more systematic, don't get carried away by too much by the external noise. Just be more disciplined about focused on good teams, good product, good differentiation. And then, obviously we need to be careful with valuation and so forth to make sure we make a good return on investment.
So some of the examples you mentioned, maybe you need to take a contrarian view. Like you said, you need to identify the ones that could be winners before it becomes obvious. I've talked to many CVCs who unfortunately have very big investment committee and everyone needs to vote yes, which doesn't drive even a chance for a contrarian view. You need consensus. How do you drive your investment decisions in Qualcomm Ventures, and how has it changed over the years?
Yeah, so we actually have a very democratic process. We get to the senior members of the team, it's called a managing director, they get to all vote on the opportunity, right? And oftentimes, some of the success we've had, like one good example would be a company like Fitbit. There was a lot of controversy in the beginning. Is this, can they sustain the business over time? Is it just a simple pedometer and so forth, right? But I think sometimes that we find is some of the controversial deals, you have to believe, like if the person who's proposing or recommending investment, it's very, very passionate about the investment opportunity, and he or she just has huge amount of conviction. And sometimes you just gotta lean forward and not let the sort of the voting get in the way, right? So I said, this person has such strong conviction on the investment opportunity, we should just lean in and see if it works. So,
okay, this is a beautiful golden nugget. I really love this.
So not always, voting. Usually we try and drive consensus, and that's how we approach things. And then even though we make exceptions to our process, it's with good reasons.
So one thing which I find interesting about CVCs or even VCs is you need to have a good framework, good processes, good rules. But you also need to know when to make exceptions. And I like the word lean in, which is you're leaning in on the passion and conviction of one of your investors to go against the consensus where not everyone believes it. The majority doesn't believe in, and yet you will say, okay, let's go.
Yeah, I would say going against everybody is probably doesn't happen too often. Usually there's very diverging views, right? There's some people like it, some people don't like it. So it's really no consensus, not very obvious.
Yeah.
It could go either way kind of thing, right? That's when we say, this could be a potential winner. We should just, lean in.
And does that change the check size you decide to do when you have so much controversial?
Not really. I think over time, one of the lessons we learned is in order to be successful, overall, you need to be, this is no different than financial VCs. I think the check size need to be sort of consistent across companies, right? Because the returns are going to be generated by these few companies have huge wins, right? You don't want to have very small dollars in these huge winners. So you want to make sure, I think the check size is fairly consistent across the different companies in the portfolio. Now, some of the winners, once they become obvious, they're winners, you probably want to double down on some of the winners, right? But in general, I think you want to be fairly consistent in terms of ownership and check size. Now, some of the early stage companies, let's say, is not very clear at all. Sometimes we do write a slightly smaller check. And part of the reason is over time, they will require a lot more capital as well over time, right? So, and then you have a lot of early risk you're taking on. So sometimes we do dial it back a little bit if the risk we view as very high.
When you make your first investments, clearly you're looking at the strategic fit as well as the financial returns. When it comes to the follow investments, do you continue to think about two or just the financial, or how are you thinking about the follow investments?
Yeah, follow investment, to most extent, I think we look at the financial return. We do check with the BUs to see if there's, engagements and so forth. Obviously, we love to have engagement, but if it hasn't happened yet, it's okay. As long as we see the trajectory is leading to something, and then obviously we do look through the financial lens, make sure the company is still, tracking to milestones, making good progress, and we want to be supported.
Very good. So you've been the head of the CVC for 5 years plus. How are you thinking about sizing the team? How are you thinking about growing the team or keeping the same size of team? I think that's something which is not obvious. There is no framework per se. So how are you thinking about it?
Yeah. So the way I'm thinking about it is really around how much capital we're deploying per year, the size of portfolio we need to manage, right? Because at some point, unfortunately, this VC game is not that scalable of a business, right? As the portfolio grows over time, you actually need more people to manage it and so forth.
Yep.
So right now, I think we're at a point where we're somewhat achieve a equilibrium, if it's the right word. We're having a lot of the companies in our portfolio actually exit. So last year, for example, we had similar number of new investment versus company exiting. So that's a good state, because then you don't necessarily need to increase the size of the team too much. If you're increasing the portfolio drastically, and then the exits not very few, then you have a lot more companies you have to manage. So I would say our team current size, it's a good size. We may expand a little bit, but I don't think we're gonna necessarily double the size in the next 2 years.
Okay, that's very, very good framework actually. How about you talk about helping? So as part of this is scaling, but part of it is helping the portfolio company with board membership. How are you thinking about board, whether it's a full board seat or if it's a board observer? Are you thinking it's the investors that should be on the board, or it should be people from the mothership? How are you thinking about that?
So typically we take either a board seat or observer seat. So we take a board seat in cases where we lead investment. If we don't lead, we can't really get a board seat usually anyways. We just get observer seat. I think the observer seat gives you as much insight of the business as a full board member, and you can do all the things you normally do to help the company. There are certain things you may get excluded as an observer, but to a large extent, you have good access to the information in the company. And then in cases where we lead investment, then we'll take a board seat. Typically, the board, or either board seats or observer seats, taken by folks on our team. The business unit sometimes it's good, sometimes it gets tricky, because could be a situation where there's conflict. Right, the company could be a customer of the BU. So if you have a BU person that's sitting on the board, could arise difficult situations. So to a large extent, I would say our team takes the role of the let's just call it observer, or
that makes sense.
Board seats. Yeah.
Now let's move on to strategic value. How do you define strategic value? How do you measure strategic value to Qualcomm?
Yeah, I think the definition of strategic value, couple of fold. One is, which is, I think this one's hard to measure, is really the insight you bring to the company, right? So we organize, startup events with business units, for example, and may or may not be company we invest in, but just to get the business unit exposed to what other companies out there in the ecosystem. So we do some of those events. We haven't done as many live events last couple of years, but in the past we've done these live events. Now we're doing some are via Zoom. It's not as effective, I would say, as an in-person event. And then the other one is just engagement with the portfolio, right? So some may not be customers today, but may become customers down the road. And some may have active dialogues with the BU and portfolio companies. So we're trying to track what are the active discussions happening between the portfolio company and the business unit. That's one metric we track. The insight part is a little bit harder to measure, to be frank, right? It's just hard to quantitatively measure how much insight you actually bring to the corporation. So we do a lot of education internally in terms of here's the sector we're seeing. We present some analysis of new interesting sectors to the different BUs and so forth. And we even bring some of these interesting companies to the exec team, just get them exposed to what's out there. So we try a variety of things to bring some of those insights that we learn as a team because we're touching so many different companies to the mothership.
Do you have one of your best practice that worked really well in terms of bringing these insights?
I think you have a good one, Nicholas, but
we're talking about you.
So we do this sector analysis, I would say, and then we deep dive into a sector. Let's say we did a sector analysis on warehouse automation. Let's just pick an example, right? Yeah. We would look at a lot of different players in warehouse automation, and then we would present these analysis to the internal BUs and maybe to a broader audience. So that one we find to be pretty effective to get sort of information out to a broader set of people pretty effectively internally. And it's good for us as well because then we understand the sector very well.
Very nice.
For us to make an investment. Yeah.
So one thing you do that I don't do, and I want to hear your feedback about it, is you do newsletter also. How useful is it? And do you get a lot of engagement from the newsletter? Is it something you recommend others to do?
So we do get some engagement on the newsletters. We measure sort of the rate of the newsletter being open and so forth. I think it's that's more of a, in my view, is more of a outbound sort of marketing thing. Okay. So we do a newsletter, a quarterly newsletter, just to showcase some of the portfolio companies, and it's also good for some of those companies to. It's another channel for them to get some marketing coverage, right, from our side. So we're trying to help them, like the portfolio companies, to promote their funding news and so forth via our social channels. And I would say newsletter is another way of promoting some of these success the portfolio company had. Maybe they got through IPO, maybe they raised a huge round, and just another vehicle for us to get our names out there, and sometimes also at the same time help the portfolio companies to get a little bit more, marketing cover externally.
Very good. Is there anything else in terms of marketing Qualcomm Ventures you've done that you think is really helping you, whether it's to reach out to entrepreneurs or to reach out to the VC community or other partners?
I mean, there's always things that we can do. So we talked about, we have a CEO summit, right? Every year since we started, maybe not since we started, but we have had it for a long time. Last one I had was maybe our 14th CEO summit. I think we find the event to be very helpful in terms of both making the connections with the investor base and our portfolio companies, as well as the Qualcomm team, our internal employees, execs, and so forth. So we have this event once a year. We couldn't do one last year, but we're thinking about doing one in 2022. We find that event to be very helpful, both from a brand perspective, marketing perspective, as well as just to reconnect with people, to make sure that people know us in our ecosystem. And then we also do matchmaking during the event. So many of these portfolio companies could meet with Qualcomm folks as well as potential investors. So we find that event to be quite helpful.
I think it's a great event.
Thank you.
But you need enough portfolio companies to do it. So what do you think is the right size of portfolio companies, and of course the alumni who have exited but still part of the family, I guess? When do you think it starts to make sense to have that kind of events?
I think if you have, we've done it, first one we did, we probably didn't have that many portfolio companies. If you have like 20 portfolio companies, I think you can easily do it, right? Because even we have a very large portfolio, there's only so many speaking slots or so forth you can put portfolio company on stage, right? So usually we have maybe 10 or 15 companies speak. at an event, right? And then the other folks who would just attend and maybe do networking and so forth. But if you have 10 or 20 companies, I think you could do it. And you may not want to do a huge event. We've grown the event also over time to, last one, I think we had close to 300 people attend. But the earlier ones, many years back, I remember was very small.
Yeah, your event is world class. I really think it's really good, well organized, and it's all about the networking. That's what I took away from it. It's really about networking.
Yeah, as many events do, right? So there's the content is interesting, but a lot of times people want to talk to, other portfolio company or investors or just Qualcomm people, right? Because there's a lot of Qualcomm people attend this event as well, so they're trying to make some new connections. So I think overall it's just a good venue to get people together.
One of the events you invited me to, your CEO was speaking, and it had such an impact on me. And that was only 2 years ago, but it had such an impact on me because he was giving the analogies, two good analogies about leadership. And I won't give justice to explain it, but I remember it was about the submarine and the wolves.
Oh,
and that was such good analogy to leadership. I think I don't know if you recorded him when he spoke.
Yeah.
This is so good. I recommend you post it somewhere on YouTube because it's leadership can be something really hard to comprehend, and I love the way he explained it.
Yeah, that was a very good chat that I remember was at the end of the last CEO Summit 19. Yeah, it is a very good fireside chat with our CEO.
It was just amazing.
Yeah.
So talking of CEO and management, how much do you interact with the top management? How much updates do you give them? Is that on a regular basis? Is that on a ad hoc basis? What would be your best practice here?
Yeah, so I view my I have a direct sort of boss, if you will, but I have other senior management team that I'm report to indirectly, I would say. So I send them a quarterly updates on just the overall activities with our team. So that's something I send. And then on a quarterly basis, I have sync ups with folks on the team, just give them key updates on what's happening. And then throughout the period, there's opportunities just comes our way, right? Sometimes it could be a new investment opportunity I want to expose it to them. Sometimes it just could be a portfolio company that's one of the I find to be good one that I want to highlight to them. So obviously I have to be careful with using their time and so forth. But in general, it's I haven't had trouble access to the managing team, but I use different ways to get some information I just to send, and some are more through a company meeting and or a discussion with a specific portfolio company.
Actually, one thing which you explained, but maybe it's good to make it clear to the audience, is your investment committee to make decisions is inside Qualcomm Ventures. You don't need your top management to approve a check size, correct?
Well, so that's not quite entirely true. So we do have investments. So our treasurer, which doesn't technically part of Qualcomm Ventures, he does get involved in approving investments.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then up to a certain dollar size, and if it's much bigger investment, then it goes to the senior management.
Okay, so there's value to keep updating the top management anyway about how the portfolio companies go.
Absolutely. So I send a quarterly updates, so they get a sense of what are some of the new investment, and maybe what are some of the companies that's exited. And then also what are some of the key engagements between the companies and our business unit. So they get a quarterly summary of the activities from me every quarter.
Very nice. And I assume it's not just the strategic value, but also the financial returns you are updating them on.
Yeah, both the financial and as well as the engagements. Yeah.
Very good. So one of the things that I learned when I went to Monterey in GCV was a CVC is only a CVC when it survives a CEO. Yeah. I believe you survived at least 3 CEOs so far.
So let me see. From my time, I've been there 2 CEO transitions. So this is my 3rd CEO.
Yeah. And with Christian Amon, this was probably one of the smoothest transition ever.
Yeah, Cristiano's been with the company for a long time, so he obviously knows what we do.
Yep.
So it's not as much, educating you have to do, right? He's seen us operating, and he's obviously familiar with us, and we've done well over time, and yeah, it was a fairly smooth transition, I would say.
Yeah. So I want to end the interview with a looking forward question, which is really about where do you see beautiful opportunities for you to invest in the next 2 years? What do you think will really be moving the needle both for Qualcomm, but maybe also for society?
Yeah, so one area we've been actually spending a lot of time on is broad area of applied AI, right? So we've built a lot of capabilities in our chipsets in terms of AI capabilities. So autonomous cars would be an example, but on mobile devices, we have AI engines as well, right? So we're interested in use cases, right? Could be language use cases, could be video use cases, to be able to leverage a lot of the capability we have in these devices. If you look at the world today, all the devices, the smartphones connect to the cloud. So we're about creating or creating this, we call it connected intelligent edge, right? Whether it's a mobile device, whether it's a robot, whether it's autonomous car, we want to be able to work with these companies that's creating this world of all these devices being smart, being connected.
Yep.
We want to find new use cases, and we wanted to invest in some of these companies to help them to leverage the technology we have and trying to create this ecosystem of more interesting use cases, more companies that's leveraging AI and connectivity to build this world that I think will have a huge impact on society.
I can sense your conviction and passion when you describe that future. It's really, really nice. Quinn, I want to thank you for your time. I learned a lot, and I'm sure the audience will learn a lot from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nicolas, for the opportunity. You've been very kind. And it's a great opportunity, honored to be here. And hopefully, people get some insights out of this. And thank you again for the opportunity.
Full of golden nuggets. Thank you so much, Quinn. Bye.
Thank you, Nicolas. Bye-bye.